Welcome, Mr. Linux. I presume you've guessed by now who it is you're talking to.
I've got some theories.
I want you to work for me, Linux. Feel real power coursing through your veins. This power.
Infernal, Hell's Vengeance. Now there's a title I could have fun with if I hated the game. Just imagine the possibilities. This game is infernal, or how about, this game is Hell's Vengeance against anyone foolish enough to actually play it. Unfortunately, however, like the similarly named Damnation I reviewed just last week, this is a game I sought out based on GameSpot's bitch slap of a 3.5 out of a 10 rating because, in all honesty, writing a review of a bad game just sounds more fun than reviewing a game that I don't hate. Under those circumstances, I'm sorry to say yet again, I don't hate this game. At all. It leans toward mediocrity, sure, but not out-and-out badness. And at times, dare I say, it's even a little fun. In this port of a little-known PC game from 2007, you play as Ryan Lennox, a not-so-subtle dead-ringer for actor Ryan Reynolds. You're a former agent for the Etherlight Corporation turned rogue and now working for the Abyss. In this universe, basically think of heaven and hell as competing corporations in a science fiction setting. It's kind of interesting and yet kind of silly, and the game seems to get that. The story and its key players never take things too seriously, and it's all fairly entertaining in a B-movie sort of way. Too bad the voice actors suffer from some seriously weird accents and sound like they're just reading words from a script most of the time. The game is essentially a third-person shooter, and a decent one. Running and gunning is pretty fun. Weapons have a satisfying feel to them, and busting caps on your foes is pretty satisfying stuff. There's a Gears of War style cover mechanic, but it's all pretty optional, so strategy isn't really in order of the day here. Some demonic superpowers like flaming bullets and teleportation offer up some additional variety. Kudos to the game for not doing the obvious and adding a Halo-inspired health recharge ability like virtually every other shooter on the market. Instead, Ryan has to devour the souls of his slain opponents by hovering over them and absorbing their essence, which can net everything from a health recharge to new weapons to keycards. Unfortunately, the process of absorbing souls can become tedious fairly quickly. It's made worse by the fact that dead bodies vanish in a scant few seconds. This is annoying in any game, but when you actually need said corpses to restore your health and ammo, it's just flat out frustrating. So okay, the gunplay is actually pretty good. That's a necessary step in the right direction for any shooter. However, Infernal's levels represent a pretty uninspired menagerie of sci-fi temples and warehouses, and you'll find yourself gunning down the same enemy types way too often for my liking. As well, the game's design is questionable. Dropping off platforms that seem like they're maybe 5 feet tall can result in your instant death, while glass, as a rule, generally is indestructible until the game just decides you need to break a window in order to proceed. Another sequence requires you to climb a fence to progress, even though this has never worked before. As a result of these sorts of boneheaded gameplay mechanics, Infernal is more confusing than it should be, and it kills the pace of an otherwise fun action experience. What the game does best is let you bust caps, and yet it seems to deliberately put a hold on the said cap busting to throw arbitrary and needlessly confusing puzzles your way on a fairly regular basis. In terms of production value, the graphics are pretty good for a game from 2007, although they're not particularly well suited to cinematics. The game just falls short in terms of art direction, which gives it a fairly generic flavor despite the interesting setting. Sound effects do their work admirably, especially in the way of firearms, but the soundtrack mostly consists of bad heavy metal that kicks in when you're under attack, and to be honest, it's just plain annoying. I had hoped we'd left generic metal riffs in the hell of action gaming from the mid-1990s, but it seems that's not entirely the case even in 2009. Again, I know I come off like some self-proclaimed patron saint of gaming, but this game isn't bad at all, contrary to what GameSpot and others might have you believe. When it works quite well. Unfortunately, it's hard to shake the mediocre vibe it exudes thanks to uninspired levels, bad rock music, and cheap design. If you're in the mood for a third-person shooter that doesn't take itself too seriously, you could do much worse than stepping into the shoes of Ryan Reynolds, Ryan Lennox's shoes. Still, having said that, don't expect Gears of War 2. Action fanatics in between better titles would do well to pick this one up from the bargain bin it's all but destined for.